reduction of the central bank rate from 8.25 to 7% and lowering of the cash reserve ratio from 5.2 to 4.2%, thereby injecting an additional shilling 35 billion to the money market. Further, during this period, commercial banks were allowed flexibility with regard to requirements for loan classification and provisioning. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic activities in the country, the government implemented a comprehensive economic stimulus program targeting activities in infrastructure, education, health, business liquidity, agriculture and food security, tourism, manufacturing, environment, water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, in spite of these interventions, a lot remains to be done in order to deal with the challenges of unemployment among our youth, as well as high poverty and income inequality levels that have been aggravated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Our rallying call in this year's budget is therefore job creation through continued and sustained economic growth. To strengthen this position, we shall implement comprehensive economic recovery strategy that will expand economic activities and address these challenges. Mr. Speaker, the private sector remains key to employment creation and poverty reduction in the country. In order to expand the scope and pace of policy interventions and enhance access to credit by businesses, the government established the Credit Guarantee Scheme to de-risk lending to the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the plight of the vulnerable in our society, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, remains a key concern for our government. In order to cushion this particular group, the government will enhance cash transfer allocations and institute other targeted interventions in this budget. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered one of the worst health and economic crises of our time. The pandemic overstretched our health systems, and in line with the advisory of the World Health Organization, the government implemented appropriate interventions to save lives. The response has undoubtedly strengthened our healthcare system through provisioning of necessary medical supplies, installation of modern equipment, and deployment of more health personnel. In addition, in March 2021, the government launched the National COVID-19 Vaccination Program, initially targeting the frontline workers and other highly vulnerable groups. As at end of May 2021, about 1 million persons had received the first vaccine dose. In order to facilitate further rollout of vaccines to create herd immunity, we propose to allocate Kenya shilling 14.3 billion in the financial 2021-22. This is in addition to Kenya shilling 7.6 billion appropriated in the current budget. Mr. Speaker, to enhance access to affordable medical and equipment for management of COVID-19 and chronic diseases, I will later in this statement be proposing tax relief measures on the various pharmaceutical products and medical equipment. Mr. Speaker, the containment measures instituted by the government to stem the spread of the virus and save lives adversely affected economic activities and revenue performance. To stimulate economic activities and enhance government's ability to respond, we prioritized health and social expenditures and formulated an economic recovery strategy program that targeted, first, enhancing our ability to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, reducing debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation with a view to stabilizing debt to GDP ratio over the medium term. Third, implementing targeted policy, legal and institutional reforms, while at the same time addressing vulnerabilities in the state-owned enterprises worsened by the COVID-19 pandemic. And fourth, strengthening the monetary policy framework and financial stability. Mr. Speaker, under this program, we plan to reduce the level of fiscal deficit from 8.7% of GDP in the current budget to 7.5% of GDP in the financial 2021-22, and further to 3.6% of GDP in the financial year 2024-25. This will be a 5.1% reduction in fiscal deficit over the next 4 years, thereby slowing the annual growth of debt. Upon our request, this economic recovery program is supported by multilateral and bilateral development partners with the International Monetary Fund providing financial resources amounting to US dollars 2.34 billion over the next 3 years. Further, Mr. Speaker, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the G20 countries extended support to developing countries by offering debt service suspension under the G20 Debt Service Suspension Initiative framework. The fiscal space created under this initiative is to increase social, health, and economic spending in response to the COVID-19 crisis. Kenya has benefited from this initiative through expansion of health and social services. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, Kenya welcomes the initiatives under the recent French African Summit that agreed to, among others, increase funding through the IMF special drawing rights to African states to support economic recovery, extension of the G20 debt service suspension, and facilitate the manufacture of vaccines in Africa. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight the economic policy context in which this budget has been prepared. Mr. Speaker, this year's budget has been prepared against a backdrop of projected global economic recovery. This is despite the emergence of COVID-19 variant, occasioning reintroduction of containment measures to further stem spread of the virus. The projected recovery reflects additional fiscal support in a few large economies and monetary easing that further uplifts the economic outlook. This outlook is further supported by the ongoing vaccinations, which is expected to pick up in the second half of 2021. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the global economy is projected to grow by 6% in 2021, from a contraction of 3.3% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, closer home, due to improved exports and commodity prices, economic growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected to expand by 3.4% in 2021, from a contraction of 1.9% in 2020. This growth will also be supported by recovery in both private consumption and investment as the economies reopen. Mr. Speaker, like the rest of the world, our economy was not spared from the adverse impact of the pandemic. In addition, the Kenyan economy experienced two other shocks. One, the invasion of the desert locusts that damaged crops, and two, floods that caused loss of lives and livelihoods, displacement of people, and destruction of infrastructure. Given the impact of these shocks, economic growth for 2020 declined to 0.6% from 5.4% in 2019. Mr. Speaker, economic growth is expected to rebound to 6.6% in 2021. This recovery reflects the lower base of 2020, when most services sectors were adversely affected by the closure of the economy, recording negative growth. The outlook in 2021 will be reinforced by the prevailing stable macroeconomic environment and the ongoing implementation of the strategic priorities of government under the Big Four agenda and economic recovery strategy. Weather conditions are expected to be favorable, supporting agricultural output. As a result, export of goods and services will expand as global demand normalizes. Over the medium term, the economy is expected to remain resilient and grow at a rate above 6.1%. Mr. Speaker, this growth outlook is affirmed by the recent surveys by the Monetary Policy Committee, revealing a general optimism about economic growth prospects. In addition, the recent IMF mission to Kenya noted that economic recovery is underway and estimates economic growth consistent with our projections. Mr. Speaker, to support this growth outlook, we shall continue to maintain macroeconomic stability. Inflation, which stood at 5.9% in May 2021, is expected to remain within the target range of 5%, with a margin of 2.5 on either side, supported by prudent fiscal and monetary policies. Interest rates will be expected to remain low and stable, supporting growth of private sector credit. The balance of payments is also expected to be strong, with the current account balance projected to remain at 5.2% of GDP. Further, the rebound in horticulture and tea exports, as well as increased inflows of remittances, will support build-up of adequate levels of official foreign exchange reserves, creating buffers against short-term shocks in the foreign exchange market. Mr. Speaker, the aforementioned economic outlook may be affected by emerging domestic and external risks. The emergence of the new of new COVID-19 variants could lead to reinstatement of containment measures, disrupting, among others, trade and tourism. In addition, Mr. Speaker, adverse weather conditions could lead to low agricultural output. Further, increased public expenditure pressures, particularly wage demands, could put a strain to the fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, the government will continue to monitor these developments and take appropriate policy interventions to safeguard the economy where they risk to materialize. Mr. Speaker, having outlined the economic policy context for this budget, we have carefully reflected on a theme that will resonate with our strategies to protect lives and livelihoods during this period of COVID-19, cushion the vulnerable, and support economic recovery for employment creation and poverty reduction. In this respect, we have framed the theme for this budget as Building Back Better, a strategy for resilient and sustainable economic recovery and inclusive growth. Mr. Speaker, the next section of my statement will give highlights of the policy priorities of the government and the strategy for economic recovery. I will later provide highlights of the fiscal framework underpinning the budget, spending priorities, and the proposed tax policy measures. Mr. Speaker, the implementation of Big Four agenda remains a high priority and critical to the economic recovery. In this regard, the government will fast-track implementation of programs and projects under the Big Four agenda to enhance food and nutritional security, achieve universal health care, provide affordable housing, and support growth of manufacturing sector for job creation. Mr. Speaker, the government will also undertake the following targeted strategic interventions to achieve a resilient and sustainable economic recovery. First, maintain a macroeconomic stability and enhance security to foster a secure and conducive business environment and security of Kenyans and their properties. Second, scale up development of critical infrastructure in the country such as roads, rail, energy, and water to reduce the cost of doing business and ease movement of people and goods, as well as promote competitiveness. Third, enhance investment in key economic sectors for broad-based sustainable recovery by promoting agricultural transformation, growth in manufacturing, environmental conservation and water supply, stimulating tourism recovery, and sustainable land use and management. Fourth, expand access to quality social services in health, education, and appropriate social safety nets for the vulnerable population. Fifth, support the youth, women, and persons living with disability through government-funded empowerment programs that leverages on partnerships with the private sector organization. Sixth, support county government through transfer of shareable revenues to strengthen their systems and capacity in service delivery. And lastly, implement various policy, legal, and institutional reforms to enhance efficiency of public service delivery. Mr. Speaker, following the outbreak of the pandemic, we implemented the economic stimulus program to support economic activities and mitigate the adverse impact of the pandemic on Kenyans and businesses. The achievement of the program includes: 1, creation of 100,000 jobs opportunities for the youth under the Kazi Mtaani initiative, and 5,500 community scouts in wildlife conservation areas across the 47 counties. 2, improvement of education outcomes through construction of additional classrooms in secondary schools, procurement of locally fabricated desks for both primary and secondary schools, and recruitment of 4,000 and 8,000 primary and secondary school intern teachers, respectively. 3, enhancement of healthcare system capacity by recruiting 5,000 diploma and certificate level healthcare workers for 1 year under the universal health coverage. 4, enhancement of liquidity to businesses through payment of VAT refunds of shilling 10 billion and clearance of pending bills of shilling 13.1 billion. 5, de-risking of lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises by providing shilling 3 billion to the Credit Guarantee Scheme as a seed capital. And 6, cushioning the vulnerable, particularly the emerging urban vulnerable, with an additional shilling 10 billion to the cash transfer program. Mr. Speaker, Building on the success of the aforementioned interventions, the government is now set to implement an elaborate economic recovery strategy that aims to reposition the economy on an inclusive and sustainable growth trajectory. The strategy seeks to enhance resource mobilization to ensure sustainable funding of our development programs from diverse sources, including public-private partnership and lease financing. The strategy will also support the role of the private sector in the economy and further facilitate credit access by micro, small, and medium enterprises through the Credit Guarantee Scheme. Under the strategy, the government will upscale investment in ICT and digital infrastructure in order to facilitate e-commerce and efficient delivery of public services. The government shall also promote local production processes and domestic supply value chains and strengthen social protection through targeted policy interventions and programs. Mr. Speaker, undoubtedly, successful implementation of this strategy will enable us to realize the aspired economic growth, create employment, and narrow income inequalities. I will later in this statement propose budget allocations to the government priority areas. Mr. Speaker, besides the achievements under the economic stimulus program, the ongoing key strategic interventions of government as well as sustained policy reforms over the years have greatly transformed the economy and improved the welfare of Kenyans. Mr. Speaker, I will now highlight some of the key achievements realized from these investments and reforms. Mr. Speaker, at the macroeconomic level, our prudent fiscal, monetary, and financial policies have resulted into fast, strong economic growth that averaged at 5.6% between 2013 and 2019. However, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic slowed growth in the year 2020. The GDP per capita increased by an impressive 80.4% from shilling 113,000 in 2013 to shilling 204,000 in 2019. New jobs created by both the formal and the informal sector increased by 12%, from 755,000 in 2013 to 846,000 in 2019. Second, inflation rate has remained within target range, averaging 6.1%. Third, interest rates have declined while credit to the private sector increased. Lending rates declined from 17.3% in 2013 to 12% in 2020, while the central bank rate declined from 8.5% in 2013 to 7% in 2020. As a result, credit to the private sector increased from shilling 1.5 trillion in 2013 to shilling 2.8 trillion in 2020. Fourth, the current account deficit improved from 8.8% of GDP in 2013 to 4.7% of GDP in 2020, supporting the stability of the foreign exchange market. And fifth, revenue collection, including appropriation in aid, doubled from shilling 900 billion in the financial 2013-2014 to an estimated shilling 1.8 trillion in the financial 2020-21. Mr. Speaker, our investment in the expansion of road networks, railways, seaports, airports, and energy has enhanced domestic and regional connectivity, boosted rural productivity, and reduced urban congestion. These investments include: 1, the standard gauge railway and the urban commuter rail in Nairobi, the ongoing rehabilitation of meter gauge railway lines along various routes, including Nairobi-Nanyuki and Nakuru-Kisumu-Butere. 2, the recently launched first batch in Lamu Port as a critical pillar of the Lapsset corridor. Our focus to make Lamu a free port for both domestic and transshipment purposes. In addition, the government is establishing a disease-free zone in Lamu to support export of live animals and processed meat. 3, the rehabilitation and subsequent use of Kisumu Port will enhance efficiency in regional trade. And 4, expansion in energy generation and connectivity, with over 7.5 million households today connected to electricity compared to 2.3 million households in 2013. Mr. Speaker, the government has provided various incentives at our ports, including exempting the fuel supply to the shipping lines from import and excise duty, VAT, as well as railway development levy and import declaration fees. To further attract more ships to our ports, Particularly to the recently launched Lamu Port, the government will review the arrangements on fueling by vessels calling at the Kenyan ports, with a view to allowing ship-to-ship refueling and establishment of fuel bunker facilities. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the various reforms in the agricultural sector, we focused on the livestock sector by reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. We shall set up a meat processing plant in Lamu to provide ready market for livestock, increase income to farmers, and enhance the meat value chain. Mr. Speaker, we also focused on increasing fish production by refurbishing Yattani fishing complex and setting up a new fish processing plant in Lamu. This will promote exports and increase income for the local fishermen. Mr. Speaker, in order to improve access to land as a factor for development, we have stepped up investment in the sector and rolled out ambitious national program of land titling and digitization of land records. Mr. Speaker, tea and coffee subsectors provide livelihoods to millions of Kenyans. Despite its contribution, the foreign exchange earnings, the returns to farmers have been declining due to low productivity, high input cost, low levels of value addition, and weak regulatory and institutional framework. Under the ongoing reforms in the coffee and tea sectors, I'll be proposing further measures to enhance competitiveness of these subsectors. With regard to manufacturing, Mr. Speaker, the government has revived and transformed textile, leather, and automobile industries, which have in turn created jobs for our youth. The full operationalization of special economic zones in Dongokundu, Naivasha, and Kisumu will support local industries, industrial activities, and unlock additional employment opportunities. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has supported local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles by providing various tax incentives. This includes removal of excise duty on locally assembled motor vehicles, duty-free importation of complete knockdown kits, and reduced corporate tax from 30 to 15% for the first 5 years of operation. I am pleased to note that the industry has responded positively to these interventions, and to date, we have approved 13 motor vehicle and 17 motorcycle assemblers. These local assemblers have created employment opportunities while also saving the country substantial foreign exchange. Mr. Speaker, whereas assembly of commercial vehicles have registered tremendous growth, the passenger category of motor vehicles remains underdeveloped. This category is still dominated by imported used vehicles, comprising over 70% of passenger vehicles, which is largely attributed to the high cost of assembly. In this regard, the government is working on a framework to support the assembly of affordable passenger vehicles. Further, the government, in consultation with the stakeholders, is in the final stages of instituting comprehensive policy and administrative reforms to fully entrench local assembly of motor vehicles and motorcycles. Mr. Speaker, while we have made tremendous progress as a nation, we remain alive to the structural constraints that impede the pace of economic development, aware that a resilient and sustainable economic recovery is indeed predicated on timely implementation of appropriate policy, legal, and institutional reforms. I propose the following interventions to improve the business environment, increase efficiency in public service delivery, and strengthen accountability and transparency in public finance management. On procurement, Mr. Speaker, this House approved the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Regulation 2020 that came into effect in July 2020. With this regulation, it's now easier for procuring entities to meet the specified requirements of bilateral and multilateral agreements on technology and knowledge transfer, local content, and employment quotas, among others. For smooth implementation of the regulations, we have conducted capacity building in all 47 counties. I therefore direct procuring entities to fully comply with these regulations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure efficiency in procurement process and facilitate access by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has reviewed consolidation policy on procurement of ICT equipment and related services. In this regard, procurement of ICT equipment and related services will be decentralized to various ministries departments, and agencies with effect from 1st July 2021. Mr. Speaker, last year, we began the process of automating public procurement through an end-to-end electronic procurement system. So far, we have developed an implementation strategy that re-engineers all public procurement processes, including functional and technical requirements. In order to actualize this initiative, 31st December 2021 will be the final date for rolling out the electronic government procurement system and therefore discontinuation of the manual procurement processes. In this regard, the government will realize savings as a result of greater efficiency, reduce operational costs, enhance transparency and accountability through increased bidding participation. Mr. Speaker, to support our local contractors and undertake construction of infrastructure projects, we have proposed changes to the contracting framework through the Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Bill 2020. The bill before this House proposes, among others, to allow award of contract to multiple bidders. This indeed will support local firms and accelerate the delivery of services. Mr. Speaker, given the prevailing business environment due to the adverse impact of COVID-19 pandemic, there's an urgent need to evaluate the financial position and governance of key state corporations and institutions. It is in this respect that the government is exploring targeted reforms to strengthen these institutions, including public universities. Mr. Speaker, in the interim, the government provided financial support to strategic institutions, including Kenya Airways, Kenya Power and Lighting Company, and Postal Corporations of Kenya, which were indeed in dire need of cash to meet critical obligations. Mr. Speaker, we have developed a robust information management system to strengthen the statutory role of the National Treasury in financial and operational oversight, as well as the financial risk analysis for state corporations. Mr. Speaker, you may recall that the government introduced cost sharing in public universities in the year 1991. At that time, government funding to public universities per year was set at Kenya shilling 120,000 per student. Of this, government capitation per student was Kenya shilling 70,000, while students contributed Kenya shilling 50,000 through loan funding from Higher Education Loans Board, out of which Kenya shilling 16,000 catered for tuition fees. This is less than half of tuition fees paid currently by students in various colleges of technical and vocational education and training institutions. The ideal cost of training a student in a university has increased from Kenya shilling 120,000 to about Kenya shilling 200,000 per year, and therefore the prevailing funding arrangement introduced in 1991 is unsustainable. Under the current arrangement, universities have not only experienced financial constraints, but have also been unable to continuously honor their statutory obligations. Mr. Speaker, in order to ensure sustainability and self-reliance of public universities, the Ministry of Education is expected to engage stakeholders beginning July 2021 with a view to addressing this matter. Mr. Speaker, delays in payment of pending bills to businesses who provide services to both national and county government has affected liquidity and operation of these entities. In a number of cases, this has led to closure of businesses and affected livelihoods of the suppliers. Though progress was made in settlement of these bills by the national government, we still have challenges with the county government that still owe various suppliers huge amounts. In this regard, I direct government ministries, departments and agencies and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021. Mr. Speaker, I urge the House to support our efforts towards enforcing compliance in payment of all verified pending bills by the county government by backing our proposal under Article 225 of the Constitution of Kenya to temporarily stop transfers to county government that persistently fail to comply with the directive to clear pending bills. Mr. Speaker, the financial sector has remained stable and continued to make significant contributions to the economic growth. Our commercial banks continue to expand their businesses to the neighboring markets, including recent acquisitions in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Uganda. The continued regional expansion will leverage on the trade and investment opportunities under the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Speaker, in 2020, the Kenyan banking sector continued on its transformation journey that commenced 5 years ago, where the key pillar of the journey has been the strengthening of banks' business models, governance frameworks, and entrenching customer centricity in the operations. Mr. Speaker, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic in March 2020, the banking sector moved quickly to mitigate the impact of the pandemic on staff, customers, and the public, and instituted emergency measures to support business continuity, use of digital channels to mitigate COVID-19 infection risk, enhance liquidity to businesses, as well as facilitate compliance with health and safety protocols. As a result, banks continue to provide uninterrupted banking services to customers mainly through digital channels. Mr. Speaker, over the last 1 year, more than 54% of the bank loans, equivalent to Kenyan shillings 1.7 trillion, were restructured to enable borrowers navigate through the hard time due to the pandemic. As we move to the recovery phase, the banking sector will be expected to play a pivotal role in supporting the recovery of enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to spur economic recovery, additional capital and investments are required. In this regard, the recently established Nairobi International Financial Center Authority will play an important role and is expected to publish, before end of December 2021, a framework for attracting investments and innovative financial services into our economy and the region. Mr. Speaker, the high cost of mortgages, land acquisition, and housing unit has limited access to affordable housing. Nevertheless, government interventions are beginning to yield the desired results for affordable housing. Significant progress has been made to enhance efficiency, transparency, and certainty in land matters by re-engineering the land registration processes, digitization of land records, and implementation of the Sectional Properties Act. The government is also in the process of streamlining and simplifying the legal and regulatory process governing the housing sector and providing basic infrastructure services to developers. Further, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is supporting the growth of residential housing market in Kenya by providing long-term funding to the mortgage lenders in order to increase affordability of mortgage loans to Kenyans. As of December 2020, Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company had refinanced 1,400 affordable housing loans worth $2.75 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Kenya Mortgage Refinance Company is scheduled to issue an infrastructure bond by October 2021 to raise additional financing for its affordable housing finance objective. Consequently, the company plans to issue green bonds to finance climate-friendly housing projects. Mr. Speaker, during the current financial year, the government operationalized the credit guarantee scheme by providing seed capital of $3 billion to de-risk lending to micro, small, and medium enterprises. To this effect, the National Treasury signed credit guarantee agreements with 7 commercial banks who have now rolled out credit to micro, small, and medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, to further promote access to affordable credit by micro, small, and medium enterprises, the government has committed to progressively raise the capital to $10 billion. In this budget, I propose to allocate an additional $2 billion to the scheme. Mr. Speaker, alongside the credit guarantee scheme, on account of improved business environment, the private sector has rolled out other innovative credit products targeting micro, small, and medium enterprises. Through these innovations, the banking sector had disbursed over $20.8 billion to micro, small, and medium enterprises, equivalent to 0.7% of total gross loans by end of April 2021. Mr. Speaker, in order to unlock the full potential of digital lenders, the government has, through the Central Bank of Kenya Amendment Bill 2021, proposed to provide for licensing of digital credit service providers. This bill has been submitted to this House for consideration and approval. Mr. Speaker, capital markets play a critical role of channeling national savings and foreign capital inflows into the productive sectors. in order to enhance inclusivity and access to investment opportunities in the capital markets, I propose to amend the Central Depository Act to allow for opening of omnibus investment accounts by persons investing on behalf of others in the securities market. This will allow investment by individuals as well as collective investment by groups. Further, to improve efficiency in our capital markets and ensure fair administrative actions by the Capital Markets Authority, I propose to amend the Capital Markets Act to enable the Capital Markets Tribunal to hear and determine any appeal within 90 days. Mr. Speaker, following the Kenya Bankers Association and other industry players, we shall establish an electronic over-the-counter secondary market platform for government securities. This platform will help in deepening our domestic debt market, improve pricing efficiency and transparency in securities trading, thereby lowering yields and cost of credit in the economy. We expect the operations of the over-the-counter to be in place by June 2022. Mr. Speaker, the defined benefit pension scheme for civil servants, teachers, and disciplined forces has constrained growth of pension savings and also exerted fiscal pressure on government. In order to address these twin problems, the government on 1st of January 2021 rolled out the much-awaited public service superannuation scheme that covers civil servants, teachers, and the disciplined forces aged below 45 years at the commencement of the scheme, with an option for those over 45 years to join if they elect to do so. As of April 2021, a total of 340,318 public servants had indeed joined the scheme. Mr. Speaker, in the past, the processing of payment of pension benefits to retired public servants has neither been efficient nor timely, thus denying senior citizens regular incomes. To address this, National Treasury has carried out targeted reforms, including systems reengineering and the provision of real-time pension services in all the Huduma centers countrywide. I am pleased to note that, as a result of these interventions, the cumulative pension payments and pension file process increased by 40% by 31st May 2021 compared to the previous year. We expect further improvement with the planned implementation of pensions management information system late in the year. Mr. Speaker, given the disparities in the design of the various existing pension schemes and the attendant laws, it has become necessary that these laws be harmonized, hence the need for establishment of one national retirement policy. The policy currently under development seeks to achieve comprehensive pension coverage across formal and informal sectors so as to protect the interests of beneficiaries and rights of pension contributors. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, I shall be publishing the policy by December 2021. Mr. Speaker, further, to enhance good governance and improve accountability and transparency in the management of retirement benefit schemes, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for the registration and regulation of corporate trustees that provide services to pension schemes. Mr. Speaker, our retired citizens have continued to experience challenges in accessing Medicare. For this reason, we have developed post-retirement medical regulations to allow members to make additional voluntary contributions to a medical fund. This will enable retirees access the funds at the retirement or transfer a portion of it to a medical insurance provider. However, the existing regulations exclude post-retirement medical funds established under irrevocable trust by employers and service providers outside the retirement benefit scheme, popularly known as the standalone post-retirement medical funds. These funds have remained unregulated, thus adversely exposing members' funds. As such, I propose to amend the Retirement Benefits Act to provide for regulation of these funds. Mr. Speaker, majority of Kenyans in the informal sector are not covered by any pension scheme, making them vulnerable during old age. To address this, I undertook last year to establish a national informal sector pension scheme with a sustainable model that combines long-term savings with short-term needs, targeting the more than 15 million in the informal sector workers who have been excluded from the current pension arrangement. To this effect, I wish to report that necessary instruments to operationalize the scheme, including trust deeds and rules, business plan, and investment policy, have been prepared. We intend to roll out this scheme in the next financial year. Mr. Speaker, to reinforce realization of affordable housing, last year, we amended the Retirement Benefits Act and mortgage regulations to allow members to use part of their accumulated benefits to purchase residential houses. This will support members of retirement benefit schemes to own homes. In this budget, I propose to amend the mortgage regulations to allow members to utilize up to 40% or maximum of shilling 7 million of the accrued benefits to purchase a house and a tenant purchase basis by their pension scheme. Mr. Speaker, currently, foreign insurance brokers are excluded from the definition of brokers under the Insurance Act, thereby making them operate in the country without any controls, thus putting insurance and policyholders at risk. To address this, I propose to amend the Insurance Act to provide for the regulation of foreign insurance brokers. Mr. Speaker, classes of long-term insurance business were amended in 2009 to align with modern classification and bring into perspective the industry's current size. However, the permitted maximum management expenditure was not updated to match the new classification, which causes insurance to either overestimate or underestimate the management expenses, impacting negatively on policyholders. I therefore propose to amend the insurance regulations to provide for the maximum permitted expenditure for each category. Mr. Speaker, to effectively manage disaster response in a more coordinated manner, the government has developed a Disaster Risk Management Bill 2021. The objective of the bill is to better prepare and coordinate our disaster response, mitigation and recovery, as well as build resilience at both national and county levels. Given the urgency to provide a framework for disaster management at both levels of government, I appeal to this House to prioritize consideration of this bill. Mr. Speaker, climate change remains a key concern globally, given its adverse impact on economies. In this regard, government will strengthen capacity of national and county governments to plan, budget, implement, and monitor climate resilience investment. The government has partnered with development partners in the implementation of the proposed financing locally led climate action program and already mobilized funding of shilling 18 billion to support the initiative over the next 5 years. Through this program, we shall strengthen national and county government capacities to manage climate risk through support to the county climate change units, establishment of county climate change fund, and development of climate change laws. Mr. Speaker, the government has also developed and approved the Sovereign Green Bond Framework, identified a portfolio of projects for consideration under the framework.